woman.
He was coming at me with a knife.
After woman.
Most people don't survive, being shot in the face.
All victims of crime.
There have been moments where I can feel, smell, taste what happened to me.
All Black, living in Chicago. Good evening. I'm CBS 2 investigator Dorothy Tucker. Tonight, a special 30-minute report on a story we've been working on for more than a year. A critical story about our city, my city. I was born in Chicago, raised on the West Side, went to Austin High School, graduated from Northwestern, and I raised my 3 children here in the city. For nearly 40 years, I've been reporting in the community, thousands of stories, big and small, and I've done my share of crime stories and talked with so many victims, too many. But it wasn't until our team analyzed every single crime for the last 20 years did we discover perhaps the most troubling pattern we've ever uncovered about crime in Chicago. That one group of people had been bearing the brunt of violence over these many years. And that group of people looks like me.
We begin tonight with breaking news. Reports of multiple people shot on the city's west side.
It's all we think about.
Multiple suspects walked up to the victim demanding his car.
Our biggest fear.
Breaking tonight, 4 teens, 3 15-year-olds and 1 16-year-old, all shot while on a front porch.
Being the next victim of a crime.
The man stumbled down the Chinatown platform, bleeding from his neck from a gunshot wound.
But what are your chances?
We're not just talking about 1 or 2 robberies here. We're talking dozens of them.
Who's really the most at risk? Is it white men, white women, Asians, Hispanics, black men? No, it's not. It's women who look like Tonia Thomas.
It's scary.
According to Chicago police crime data for 2022, when you look at all the offenses, count all the victims, black women are the most at risk.
It's not fair.
Unfair because that 67,000 means 25% of crime victims are black women. But they make up only 16% of Chicago's population. And when the CBS 2 investigators kept digging, we discovered even more disturbing data. Black women represented more than a third of kidnappings, 35% of assaults, 38% of batteries attacked and injured, 40% of rape victims. And let this sink in. Black women are 52% of human trafficking victims. Remember, they're only 16% of the population.
To have to navigate through life knowing that you'll potentially become a victim of a crime, primarily because of your race and your gender combined, it's not fair.
Thomas survived a rape.
This is all the paperwork from the hospital.
But she still feels the pain.
What happened to me, it won't go away.
It happened here, this West Side apartment building, at a friend's party.
I did have a couple of drinks, but nothing too crazy.
Pictures of a happy, smiling Thomas were taken just minutes before she felt dizzy and went to the bathroom. The police report details the horrors of the criminal sexual assault.
I remember being in the bathroom with the person who assaulted me. And I remember just trying to get out of the restroom. But I couldn't get out.
The car was parked actually right there on the corner, right before the stop sign.
Even when it comes to nonviolent crimes and reports where police record race, black women,
I couldn't believe it.
Like Evelyn Sparks, are targets. Black women account for 24% of property thefts, arson 28%, car thefts 29%. Again, they're only 16% of the population.
You could see it out the window.
A 2019 Kia.
I parked there every day.
But in less than 10 minutes, it was gone. Photos of a trashed Kia found by police an hour later.
Somebody to take something that you worked so hard for, it just makes you feel very violated.
Why are they targets? Because they're, if you want to call it, easy prey. Yes, yeah.
Geneva Brown is a professor of criminology at DePaul University.
We just had an unfortunate Officer Preston who was killed. She was on her way home at 1:40 in the morning, and she was a target of a robbery, disproportionately. Black women are working third shift jobs. Black women are in communities where there is a lack of a middle class, a lack of a economic foundation that would deter this type of behavior.
Where they live, when they work, and listen to this, how they are perceived by criminals put a target on the backs of Black women.
You know that you're in a neighborhood where crime is the norm and not the exception. You're in a neighborhood where you know that the police are slow to respond. It creates that atmosphere where, unfortunately, you have people who feel empowered to become bolder or to continue to commit offenses until they're caught.
Why does it always have to be me? When do I get a break? When can I have some peace? I hear those words quite often in the work that I do.
Gabrielle Molden Carwell works as a trauma therapist, helping Black women cope with their emotional pain.
It's disheartening and it causes self-doubt because something must be wrong with me.
She knows the trauma of sexual assault, not just because she treats survivors.
I've seen it in my mom.
She's lived with it.
I've seen it in my grandmother on my mom's side. I've seen it for myself.
And how old were you?
I was 12.
In the year 2000, when this photo of a carefree little girl posed for the camera, masking her torture.
It went on for about 6 months or so. I was angry. I was heartbroken.
It's very aggravating.
Rage keeps me up at night a lot.
How long have Black women been overrepresented? The CBS 2 investigators went searching for answers. We looked at every crime, every victim, not just 1 or 2 years, not 3 or 4. We went back 21 years. CBS 2 investigative data journalist Elliot Ramos crunched the numbers.
The stuff is buried in like statistical reports that come out every year.
But it's here, the latest, pages 79 to 81.
You got batteries, you got robberies.
Ramos combined the crime data
by day of week, by location type,
with race, sex, and age from police reports.
It was surprising at how consistently Black women in particular were over-indexed in relation to the population, like year after year after year.
The revelation, Black women have always suffered more than others. A surprising fact?
I was 16 when all of that was going on.
No one suffers more than young Black girls under 18. A perfect picture of a thriving high school junior at Little Village until she dated the wrong boyfriend.
I remember like him grabbing my arm and he swung on me and hit me. He was very violent. He was very mentally abusive. All of that was very traumatic.
From 2001 to 2022, for every white girl attacked and injured, there were 18 Black girls hurt.
I decided like I wanted to take some pills. I no longer was getting the A and B's that I wanted. So if my grades began to drop, I felt very burdened. And so I no longer wanted to feel burdened.
I feel like this is just as bad as the war on drugs, right? Like everything went shut down for that. But what about these crimes?
But for Black women disproportionately targeted by crime, there is no special task force, no mayoral commission.
We talk about big picture stuff, we talk about, hot topics, but Black female victimization is not a hot topic.
And Brown adds, no public outcry to address the core causes.
And I think that this is a conversation that needs to be had.
We've been counting CTA attacks, and this one marks 8 in the past 10 days.
As a Black woman walking into the world,
some of the 14 wounded are still in the hospital.
Every day and knowing there's this high probability that something's going to happen to me when I leave the house. And it's like, do you even leave home? But we have to. We can't, live a life where we're sheltered, but why should we have to?
Women, simply getting something to eat or getting gas. Targeted. There was one woman we interviewed, and before we can even tell her story, she was murdered. Chicago.
Sunshine already in Chicagoland. It'll be here for a while.
For all it has to offer, can be a challenging city.
New at 10, we're learning more about the victims in the horrific hit and run over the weekend.
At least 57 people shot over 38 violent robberies in 3 weeks.
Especially for black women.
Miss Patterson is moving slowly, just out of the hospital recovering from gunshot wounds.
I get in my car every day and I'm concerned about what will happen to me. You know, I don't know if today's the day somebody want to carjack me. I don't know if today's the day that they want to rob me. I don't know. And that's scary about being in Chicago and being a black woman because we are not protected.
Consider a mundane trip to the gas station. In 2022, 66 black women were carjacked or robbed at the pump.
I was filling up my gas for the week. It was over the weekend. I was filling up my gas for the week, for the work week.
Sierra Jameson was one of them.
I had a young gentleman come up to me and asked me, did I smoke? I said, no, sir, I do not smoke.
She wasn't driving this car. She was driving her prized 2018 black Jeep Wrangler. That's what the man wanted.
He was like literally coming right here. Bitch, give me your keys.
Even though he had a kitchen knife, this single mother and aspiring nurse with a 6-year-old son with autism said no.
What made me say no? Because I observed him. I could tell that he was really, I could tell that he really didn't know what he was doing because he was flinchy, he was nervous.
She also saw 2 other women nearby who had her back and a bat.
So I'm doing this. I said, give me your bat, give me your bat. So he did me like this. He let go, then he ran.
Jameson was naturally relieved, but then she got angry.
It was a few men here after the incident saying that this young man was standing here the whole day.
But he didn't attack anyone until she came along.
I'm sure because I'm a young black woman, he wanted to target me. I know he didn't target the man that came up and through here. I guess he feel like I was gonna be vulnerable, be like, huh, get the key. But no, he got the wrong female.
If black women feel like they're targets of crime, they have good reasons. Look at the stats. Simply going through their daily lives makes them vulnerable. Last year at grocery stores, 277 black women were preyed on by criminals. In and around Chicago parks, 162. Even in the sanctuary of a church, 47 black women filed police reports. And on the public transportation so many rely on, 769 black women faced assaults, batteries, robberies, and other crimes just trying to get to work, return home, or go to school.
And they came from right here.
Kenya Merrills and her mom were attacked by a mob of robbers on the Red Line at 95th Street after leaving a downtown college.
He punched me in my face.
I had already knew I was finna die. So I just said, let me just shield my daughter so she won't die.
Fortunately, mom and daughter were not seriously hurt. We can't say the same for Nia Williams, out for a late-night snack.
I feel like I had a life-changing moment that's forever gonna stick with me, simply because I went to go get something to eat.
A couple of gyros at Maggie's, that's all she wanted. It was here in Bronzeville a few months ago where her life changed.
I wasn't in an argument with anyone. I wasn't at a party. I wasn't caught in a crossfire.
The police report listed the incident as a street crime. Last year, 1,130 black women were attacked and injured on Chicago's streets.
I was targeted.
3 strangers, unprovoked, started screaming at Williams inside the restaurant. Then they followed her to her car.
That night, I feared for my life.
What happened next was that life-changing moment.
You saw the gun.
He shot, boom, 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 and just start shooting at our head.
Her tone today, kind of matter of fact.
And that was it. I didn't even know I was shot right away.
But these photos from that night, her hospital bed, scream agony.
The biggest burn I ever felt, my teeth were blown out. I have no teeth here on the side. I was spitting out bullets and teeth at the same time.
Williams misses her smile.
Yes.
But she acknowledges her blessings.
Most people don't survive, being shot in the face. I'm just thankful.
I'm so blessed to be here.
We need to take you back to Sierra Jameson's story. Remember, she survived the attempted carjacking.
I'm grateful. I went home to my son. I thank God every day that I'm here, because it could have went a different way.
Jamison went home to her son on that day. But less than a month after this interview, she was the victim of another crime. Only this time, she would never see her son again.
We're honoring her legacy. We're honoring her life.
Jamison was murdered just days after celebrating her 30th birthday, found strangled inside her garage, her body lying next to her Jeep Wrangler. The family released balloons in her memory.
My niece is no longer here in flesh, but my niece is always in here in spirit.
So let's go back to the beginning. How do you address something that has been part of Chicago's DNA for decades? Our investigation sparked conversations in the community and calls for action.
It has to matter collectively to everyone that Black women are suffering in this way.
I was shocked. I've been a judge, prosecutor, public defender.
The CEO of the Chicago Urban League.
And my selfish desire was to make Black female victimization a priority for us. In response to hearing about this report, what should be done?
Chief Strategy Officer of the North Lawndale Employment Network.
I want generations after me to understand that the color of our skin is important and that change needs to come about.
A longtime community resident.
Today.
And mother.
What can we do as women?
Black Voices for Change.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Gathered on the south and west sides of the city.
We begin tonight with breaking news.
To talk about the data from our CBS 2 investigation.
By day of week, by location type.
I want to see us have a very specific strategy to recruiting and engaging Black women.
Maybe a call to meet with the chief of police, to meet with the mayor. He is a father. I think that would be something that we could make happen.
My hope is that with sounding the alarm and working with other organizations who mentor both young men and young women is to spread the word. To spread the word in churches, to spread the word in community organizations.
What do we do? Do a policy need to be put in place?
Their calls for action resonating with one local alderman.
We've heard it, on the peripheral. Black women are being disproportionately impacted with crime. But your segments really put it into context. I think it's important that the city of Chicago put forward some type of initiative to deal with this important issue. What I want to do is get folks together from Department of Family Support Services, Chicago Park District, Chicago Police District, Department of Housing, and the mayor's office to figure out what we can do and talk about first what the problem is. Because I think that this is about social justice.
Their voices are not alone. Even the county's top prosecutor is weighing in, not only in her official role, but as a survivor, over and over again.
So who am I? I am Kim Fox. I'm the Cook County State's Attorney.
I was sexually abused by a relative from the age of about 5 until 7.
It is our position, based on the facts, the evidence, and the law.
I was sexually assaulted on my way home from school by 2 strangers when I was 8 in the Austin neighborhood.
We believe that in this case, justice has been served.
I was sexually assaulted in college as a 20-year-old at Southern Illinois University. Yeah. There have been moments where I can feel, smell, taste what happened to me. And I find myself saying to myself, look at the leaves.
Look, I'm gonna do a clap sync, just for safety.
We wanted to interview the county's top prosecutor to get her reaction to our CBS 2 investigation.
I was heartbroken.
It's very aggravating.
Rage keeps me up at night.
A 20-year analysis revealing how black women in Chicago have always borne the brunt of crime. They make up only 16% of the population, but account for an alarming percentage of victims of violent and nonviolent crimes.
I'll be honest, Dorothy, I did not want to look at your story.
We now understand Fox's initial response. Her trauma is generational.
My mother, my aunts, my friends, myself.
Fox has publicly acknowledged her childhood abuse.
I am a crime survivor.
At a survivors rally, in a crowd of women and men,
I was sexually assaulted as a child.
Fox explained the importance of speaking out.
I am here because I want more than anything to make sure that what happened to me does not happen again to me or to any of us.
As a black woman walking into the world.
Fox finally found the courage to watch our story.
And out of respect for you and your work, I did watch.
She also found the courage to be more candid with us about the little girl with a big smile.
I was in my mother's womb. And I wasn't safe.
Fox's mother, Ganelle Wilson, was 8 months pregnant with her baby girl, living in the old Cabrini Green housing development and getting ready to celebrate her son's first birthday when a stranger broke into their home.
And she woke up in the middle of the night to find a man standing above her with a knife, threatening to kill her if she didn't tell him where the gifts were that he saw her bringing in for my brother's party. So for the entirety of the life that my mother had, that I lived with her, she never had a peaceful night's sleep. And we learned to live with her screams.
You remember those screams?
I sleep with those screams.
Fox's childhood memories are gut-wrenching. This is where the leaves come in.
I don't talk about it in depth publicly often. Because if you dig down into it, it is almost like it happened yesterday.
The year, 1980. Place, Austin Community, near Byford Elementary. The second grader was on her way home from school when she was snatched and raped by 2 men. She did what she had to survive.
The survival technique when you are being assaulted in that fashion. I remember it was an abandoned building, looking out at a tree and focusing on the leaves.
The leaves. Today, they're a reminder of her strength.
In the grips of the most difficult time of this job, I would write daily, look at the leaves. It'll be over.
Despite her heartbreaking history,
By day of week, by location type.
with race, sex, and age, Fox found the data, the numbers, the hard truth.
Jarring.
Here's what hit home for the survivor of sexual assault. Black girls suffer more than any other group. From 2001 to 2022, for every white girl attacked and injured, there were 18 black girls hurt.
You couldn't have told me that it was that bad, but when I think about, well, who do you know that hasn't been a victim of a crime?
Even as the county's top prosecutor, Fox was stunned by the findings in our investigation.
We have a real problem here. We have a fundamental issue with valuing black women across all measures.
The real issue?
What is it that it makes it difficult for us to see the difference between an R. Kelly victim and a Harvey Weinstein one?
Is there something before you leave that you will try and do?
I think in this last year that I have to be intentional around the focus on this class of victims because it has become incredibly clear that this has been an ignored class.
Fox will turn to Black women to help her focus.
It's urgent to me in this administration to do all that we can, both internally with our policies and practices, and externally with our partners, and most importantly with the communities that we serve, to bring them in, to figure out how collectively we address this issue.
Her commitment to support a commission on women and girls.
That harm happened to me 40-something years ago. And I still struggle to talk. I think being vocal about my own experience and the freedom that I then think it gives to others to say what has happened to them.
Talking, says Fox, about those painful, agonizing lived experiences is necessary to spark change for Black women in Chicago.
And this is generations in the making and will take a significant amount of time to address. It's urgent. It's urgent.
It is urgent. We don't have all the answers, but the conversations are starting, and we are committed to tracking this epidemic and working towards a solution so we can all feel safer in the communities where we live, work, and love. Woman.
He was coming at me with a knife.
After woman.
Most people don't survive, being shot in the face.
All victims of crime.
There have been moments where I can feel, smell, taste what happened to me.
All Black, living in Chicago.
Good morning. I'm CBS 2 investigator Dorothy Tucker, joining you live from Trinity United Church of Christ on the South Side. We want to thank church leaders for opening its doors so we can have a critical conversation. We are here to talk about violence against Black women. Now, if you notice, this is not a packed room, and here's why. We know it can be painful to relive the trauma that so many women experience. We hope that you are watching from a safe space. Those who are here are committed to addressing this issue, being a part of the conversation, and providing hope for a better tomorrow. Here's what you need to know. In 2022, 1 in every 3 crime victims in Chicago was a Black woman. Let that sink in for a minute. So if there are 3 of us in the room, 1 of us is a victim. That's 30% of all crime victims in Chicago. But Black women are just 16% of the city's population. Behind each number is a face, a woman with a story, and the women you are about to see were brave enough to share their experiences.
Sierra Jameson.
Naya Williams.
Tania Thomas.
Aaliyah Phillips. He was very violent. He was very mentally abusive.
I remember being in the bathroom with my, the person who assaulted me.
I was 16 when all of that was going on.
And I remember just trying to get out of the restroom because I knew that I didn't want to be there with him.
He had hit me, he punched me during an argument.
The guy took out his gun and shot 3 times inside of the window, close range.
As I was pumping my gas and he saw that I put the pump back in, he walked back up. And he just said, give me your keys.
He shot, boom, boom, boom.
Then I'm looking at him, I said, are you trying to rob me right now?
And I end up getting shot twice in my face.
I said, sir, you're not getting my keys. and then he was coming at me with a knife.
So as I'm on my way to the hospital, trying to stay calm and conscious, I'm blowing out bullets from the impact. It just blew out my whole teeth.
So I backed up, I said, okay, and then I swung on him, and then he tried to jump in my Jeep.
I was an innocent person going to get something to eat, and I was preyed on.
Because I had been drugged, because I was under the influence of not only a drug, but alcohol as well. He saw an opportunity and he took it.
I saw a lot of teenagers my age going through that, like fighting the person they were dating.
I just remember going to like the police station the day of the arrest and, you know, feeling extremely hopeful.
As women in my family share their stories, it was a pattern. They dated someone that abused them, or they were married to someone that abused them, and I ended up following into that when I got to high school.
And just being questioned multiple times by the representative from the state's attorney's office. She goes, well, you know, nobody should touch you when you're under the influence. Nobody should touch you at all without your permission. But at this time, we're not going to file charges.
I don't know why a lot of people want to target young women. I guess because we women and they don't think that we're easy to target.
I'm extremely angry about the situation.
I thank God for being here, but it's hard to still survive something like this because most people don't survive, you know, being shot in the face.
Most of the time, that's what I feel is just pure rage. Just thinking about it as a whole, rage keeps me up at night.
The experiences, though they've been traumatic, I now see them as strength. I now see them as lessons. I see them as a part of like redemption for me.
It could have been my head, it could have been my neck, my ear, my eye. And I'm just thankful. And, you know, I want to tell the attacker, you know, he changed my life, but God spared mine.
I'm grateful. I went home to my son. I thank God every day that I'm here because it could have went a different way.
Sierra was strangled just a few days before her 30th birthday. In my 40-plus years as a journalist, I've never experienced a person being murdered before I could even tell their story. What happened to Sierra underscores how vulnerable Black women are and the importance of why we are here today. Now, we have gathered a panel of experts to help lead this conversation. Joining us now, Nicole Robinson, the CEO of the YWCA, Gabrielle Molden-Carwell, a trauma therapist with the group Resilience, and Geneva Brown, a professor of criminology at DePaul University. Welcome, ladies. Also expected a little bit later here today is Superintendent Larry Snelling and Cook County State's Attorney Kim Fox. So, how did we get here? Why are Black women disproportionately targets of crime? Take a look at these numbers. 29% of car theft victims are Black women. 35% of assault victims are Black women. And when you look at all the victims of rape, 40% are Black women. So my first question to our panelists: who of you have been the victim of a crime?
I am a survivor. I've been assaulted at least 3 times in my lifetime, as early as my early adolescence. So,
I am so sorry to hear that.
I was robbed a number of years ago at gunpoint in Chatham. My car has been stolen and my home has been broken into, but I also come from, first of all, Dorothy, that clip is heartbreaking. And I come from a generation of women, my mother, my grandmother, who have all been victims of assault, and I carry that.
Thank you, ladies, for sharing. Gabrielle, you are a trauma therapist. What is the impact of when Black women are victims of crime? What's the impact on their psyches, on their lives?
It's heavy. It's heavy. It wears on their ability to do day-to-day things. It weighs on their ability to form relationships. It is so much so that some people just rather not. It's overwhelming. It is, which is why I take pride in the work that I do.
And Geneva, in terms of the impact on the community, I mean, it's not just, as you say, it's the family, it's the children. Talk some more about that as well, both of you.
I'd like to jump in. I'd say that it does impact the whole community, Dorothy. If you think about structures, because part of the reason Black women are not just victims of violent crime, we are the most sexually assaulted. We have the highest number of homicides amongst women. We experience the most microaggressions at work in every single space, home, work, community, church. We are at risk. Our bodies are at risk. But then it's also complicated by racism. And you think about men and misogyny and patriarchy and policing and the over-policing of community, and how do we keep ourselves safe in an environment where we maybe don't trust institutions. There's distrust of police. There's distrust of healthcare systems. A lot of times when a survivor has to show up, there's an individual from the YWCA who's there to hold their hand. And we had an instance where a victim, a survivor of a sexual assault, showed up at a hospital, but she was paralyzed. She couldn't walk in the door. And she didn't have anyone to help her. And it was a person, an advocate from the YWCA, who showed up and walked her in. And whether it's 5 months or 5 years, we're with them on the whole journey.
I think, Dorothy, if I may, the complication is the violence that interferes with Black women living their everyday lives. So you can't go to church, you can't drop your children off, you can't go home without the fear of car theft or burglary or assault. So it is, how do Black women have the same quality of life as other women of color or white women if we are constantly looking over our shoulders? It affects the entire course of your day and of your life, and it impacts the community as well, because everyone is on guard.
And it's not like you can leave. It's not like you can get up and just move.
Well, that's the complication, because we have such a competitive housing market now, because we have so much contested area and space now. How do you, people will tell you, well, why don't you just go? Go where? Where can you afford to go except in the neighborhoods that you live in? And even with the exorbitant rates of rent and the increases in housing, competition for resources, you have to stay put and hope for the best.
And even if you are able to physically move, you can't displace yourself from your mind. So it goes with you everywhere. It's an ever-ending cycle. PTSD is real and not acknowledged when it comes to things like sexual assault and crime because of the melanin in my skin.
Right. And I would just add, Dorothy, your reporting, all of this happens in public spaces. This isn't late at night. This is on the train. This is on the bus. People are going to work, to school, and they don't have a choice.
And to that point, Geneva, let's talk about the why. Why are Black women targets? Why are we easy prey?
Because unlike, and I was looking at the numbers just today just to make sure I come here with the latest data. Black women, unlike any other women in the country, we work outside of the home more than anyone else, especially Black mothers, are working at rates up to 25% more than any other group. So we're on the 24/7 work clock. We do security, we do brinks, we do every job imaginable. So if you work around the clock, you're vulnerable at certain areas and certain hours.
And when we talk about just how others can help, Nicole, we were talking earlier and you said there's a role for Black men. Talk about that a bit.
There absolutely is. We have about 50 advocates, we call them, at the YWCA, who are like saints, right? They go above and beyond the call of duty to support a survivor of an assault, from the beginning to the end, from 5 months to 5 years. They're with them until they can get some sort of justice and some semblance of their life is put back together. So what we've done, what we know about this is male allyship is so important when we think about this issue because many of the perpetrators of these crimes happens to be men, and we won't solve this without them. Women are out taking care of their families, taking care of their households, doing what they need to do, and this is just happening to them. So we've created 2 partnerships, one with 100 Black men and another with Men Can Stop Rape. And those leaders have come together with us to put together curriculums that are in elementary school, because we're starting early. I can even think about myself personally and being in elementary school and boys, trying to touch girls, right? And I think that, so it's so important to start early as an intervention. And now we're beginning to think about how do we take this from the schools to the streets? And how do we go to barbershops and other spaces where men are and they facilitate? It's not women at the YWCA, it's the men that facilitate the training. And we work together on a curriculum to build healthy relationships between men and women.
And Gabby, to all of you, how do we get this message? You talked about the youth. How do we get this message out to young Black men and women, and women in particular?
Going into the schools. I love that because Resilience also has a partnership with a company called Imagination Theater, and we go into the Chicago public schools with the brown and Black babies, and we educate them on consent and good touch, bad touch, and how to be safe in a community that may not always appear to be safe. So it's important to start with the children, but I feel like we got to do more than just go into the schools. We got to go into the churches. We got to go into the community centers, the Department of Asian centers. We have to spread this thing as wide as we possibly can because you're absolutely correct. It's the men who are going to be able to make a difference.
We're going to keep talking about that a little bit later, but I want to come back to the issues with women reporting. When I showed all of you the stats, you said to me, these numbers could be worse because there are so many women who don't even report the crime. Why is that? What prevents women from not going forward, not going to police when they should?
Not feeling safe. They don't feel safe. I've encountered clients who say that even trying to get a police report is just as violating as the assault or the crime that they lived through.
We call that secondary victimization when you go into the institutions that are supposed to help and support you, and unfortunately they're the ones who you have to constantly tell the same story over and over again. And the act of telling the story, if you don't understand sexual assault, is traumatic again because you're asking a person to constantly relive it, and the support services have to be there. How many domestic violence shelters do we have in the communities right now? How much support staff do we have? If we don't have these ladies here who are on the panel to assist, does this cover the entire city of Chicago and the issues of assault?
Absolutely not. We don't have the funding to continue to do the work that we're doing. They're getting ready to cut some more funding. So.
Yeah, and what she's referring to, we've been cut 50% of federal funding across the board. This is an issue that's not just in Chicago, Dorothy. Yeah. It is across the United States. At the YWCA, we've had to cut 15 staff members, over $1 million, which means that we can't show up for women in the way that we have been historically.
And back to how they're treated, you heard one of the women say, that we heard from a little bit earlier. She said, and I went to the police, and the prosecutors decided not to pursue the case. What are you finding in that arena as well? What do you hear? What do women say to you?
It's triggering. It's scary, and it's invalidating. It's already in the Black community a distrust of institutionalized organizations, police especially. So if I come to you and you're supposed to serve and protect and you tell me, oh, your crime is not big enough to even report. I've actually had a client said that she was laughed at when she went to go report. How demeaning, how triggering. I'm coming in, humbling myself to report, and you're telling me that my incident isn't big enough or it's laughable.
If I can say, we've made dramatic gains when it comes to reporting sexual assaults, prosecuting sexual assaults, victim witness coordinators and assistants with the district attorney, but I think we've also been a victim of our success because of the funding that's been cut, because it's no longer considered a priority or serious, or sometimes it is who the victim is. If the victim doesn't fit the profile of society's acceptance of what a victim is, that is also problematic.
Our analysis, we looked at 20 years, not just 2022. We've given those facts, but it was over the course of 20 years. Geneva, what is it about our society that makes this consistently an issue?
I would just drive down North Avenue. The difference in communities, resources, where allocation, communities that are blighted versus communities that have resources. If you have well-populated communities that have open businesses, you're less likely to be surveyed or feel as though you're going to be a potential victim of violence. If you're walking down 59th Street in Halstead, where it is sketchier, where there's less middle-class and working-class people, where there's more drug activity, more violence, then you're a potential victim there. So honestly, it's a matter of the quality of the neighborhoods. Some neighborhoods have been stripped of population and resources, but people still live there. People still have to live where they live. There are legacy homes that have been handed down generation to generation. It's just, as we said earlier, you can just tell people, well, just leave. Where are they going? They have to stay in these communities. They're the pioneers who are staying there waiting for changes to happen in their own communities.
You wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just want to build that it's economic opportunity for both the women who experience these situations and want to get out and want to change, and it's economic opportunity for the men. What is the tension between men and women that's creating this work? And then I would just like to add that when you think about historically black women, we have unfortunately been given stereotypes and branded around Mammy, Jezebel. We have been the country's mule in some way, to quote Zora Neale Hurston. So I feel like there has been this apathy, because you said 20 years. And Dorothy, you're the first one to shine a light on this issue in 20 years. That says a lot about how our society feels about black women.
And so, talk to me about just, what can be done. I mean, you've mentioned, some of your programs that exist, but, if you could say, what do we need in terms of a change in policies? What do we need in terms of a new law? What would you suggest?
I would like to see the business community step up. A lot of the communities that these women come from, they go downtown. You have to go where the jobs are. You have to expose yourself to 24-hour clock to work. So I'd like to see the business community, corporate partnerships, safe transportation. There are things that, if we're creative, we can come up with solutions to these problems.
All right, we're going to go ahead.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I would say at the YWCA, part of our mission has 3 prongs. One is healing belonging, which is what we're talking about today, but the other is building economic equity through housing, through workforce, through entrepreneurship. So the more that we can do that for both men and women alongside education in the community, the fact that 100 black men are out there and have stood up and they're going into classrooms to talk to other young men about creating healthy relationships, that's amazing. We need more of that.
All right, let's turn for a second. Because for many black women, their fears are not just external, it's personal. Too often, they are victimized by someone that they love, people they know. In 2022, there were nearly 25,000 domestic violence victims. And listen to this, 51% were black women. As a reminder, in Illinois, there is no statute of limitation on felony criminal sexual assault allegations. So if you find the strength to file a police report, it is not too late. 51%. Why? Gabby, why the numbers?
Again, it's the disadvantages. I've seen situations where financially I can't support myself without my partner, regardless of how abusive he may or may not be. I've seen situations where it's a sense of normalcy because I've seen it in my neighborhood and my family, so I stay because this is what I know. It's also a sense of lack of resources and visibility. I don't know where to go, so I stay because where do I go from here? Who's going to help me?
Go ahead, Janina.
It's also dealing with the violence and trauma of the person who is the abuser. It is the lack of mental health resources that are available. It is how that person saw the relationships in how they were raised. And so the violence and trauma becomes cyclical until we have mental health. I'm sorry, I'm going to keep drumming on resources into the communities where the violence is most affected. So if you can show people how to have healthy relationships, how to have an argument without it escalating, if there are healthier methods of communication and relationship building, I think that's a start.
And one more build. I feel like in some ways we've robbed the opportunity to feel and love from men, because when you think about sexism in our society, and how men and boys are raised to sort of have a particular stance, to feel a certain way, to not feel, to be judged by their feelings, to not have a full range of emotions. And the more that we can allow men and boys to express a full range of emotions and encourage it and it not be viewed in a negative way, I think the more we'll have love across the full spectrum and have less violence.
You mentioned resources. Let's make sure we touch on that. At the Y, when a woman comes to you, what is available and how do you make sure that Black women in particular, but all women, know the resources that are available at the Y?
Absolutely. About half of the women we serve are Black women. We have deep expertise in this work. We have a team of folks who have been doing this for 50 years. Again, they are saints. They show up at a hospital. We have what is called a rape crisis hotline. They can call the number. They can text to have that communication with a person, and we show up on the spot. Someone is there to talk to them on their timeline. We show up at a hospital. We follow them through the justice system. So if they want to go to court, in cases where we've actually identified the perpetrator, they join them in the courtroom. In cases where it's triggering, as Gabrielle talked about, our advocates read their victim statement in court. They show up for them wherever they need to go. We also show up for them for the joy when they get on the other side and they graduate and have a baby and whatever else comes in their life. We're there for them for the whole way. We go to college campuses,
I'm going to cut you off
centers.
because
Yeah, sorry.
I want to make sure that, Gabby, when I spoke to you the other day, you said something that I did not know, and glad to hear what you're talking about. Free therapy and resilience.
Yes, resilience provides free individual and group counseling. And it's short term, it's not as long as YWCA, but we also have advocates that go into the hospitals and to the courtrooms as well. And all of our services are completely free. No fine print. It's all free.
You call, you answer.
That's it.
All right. Thank you, ladies. Thank you very much for being here today. We are just getting the conversation started. After the break, we will bring in more voices to talk about the issues. And we'll answer that question that you're probably thinking. Where are the Black men? And what role do they play in protecting Black women? We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm CBS 2 investigator Dorothy Tucker. Today we're here live at Trinity United Church of Christ to have a real conversation about the violence against Black women and the need for a call to action. 1 in every 3 victims of crime is an African American woman. Here's what that really means in raw numbers. In 2022, 1,130 Black women were attacked or injured on the streets of Chicago. 769 Black women were victims of crime on the CTA. 277 were victimized simply going to the grocery store. 66 attacked at gas stations, and another 47 became victims at churches. One of the women I interviewed said to me at one point, "We can't seem to catch a break." Black women are looking for relief, for support, for resources, for policies that will bring about change.
Well, Malcolm X actually said that the most disrespected person in America is the Black woman. And I think that that is shown throughout the data that we've seen from the last 21 years.
It really dates back to slavery.
It's longer than 20 years, right? It's 400 years of racial trauma in this country with enslaved humans.
And as a result, we were dehumanized, and what that has meant for Black women over the course of decades is that we are not perceived as worthy or needing any kind of support, defense, or protection.
In the news, I've been seeing a lot of women that have filed restraining orders, but then they end up dead. They've called the police, they've done every single thing that they've been asked to do, and nothing happens, and they still lose their lives.
These narratives about Black women, oh, they can take it all, right? Like they can take getting carjacked and then take care of the kids and then go to work at a low-income job and make $1 out of 15 cents, right?
When they experience harm, the family as a whole experiences harm, the community experiences harm.
I was shocked. I've been a judge, prosecutor, public defender. I never would have guessed in a million years. And I've been one in the last 20 years, but I never just picked up that this data existed.
We talked to about 100 mothers on the south side of Chicago, many of them in neighborhoods with high levels of gun violence. 56% of them reported PTSD symptoms, about 48% reported depressive symptoms.
We really need to be protecting and defending Black women and their well-being and their health and their safety much more than what is happening today.
If you're experiencing depressive symptoms and not being able to go to work, then that affects your income, that could affect where you're living. So it really is a complex web of kind of consequences that happen from people being traumatized.
So what do we do? Do a policy need to be put in place? Do we have to go to Springfield? Like, what can we do as women to say, hey, enough is enough?
We need to actually center Black women in the analysis and understanding of how crime impacts our communities, particularly Black communities.
Look at the data, and then there has to be some advocacy. We've got to make sure that these numbers change.
When we think about what to do about it, it has to be holistic and it has to be multifaceted.
We have to look at police, prosecution, how we are perceived.
We got to remember everybody happens to be somebody's child. And we cannot forget that or lose that sight. Bring them to the table. These are the things that have to happen.
Clearly, there are no simple answers, but we have assembled a panel of voices in our community to talk about possibilities. Joining us now, Karen Freeman Wilson, President and CEO of the Chicago Urban League, Chasta Martin, Director of the North Lawndale Employment Network, and Stephanie Coleman, Alderwoman of the 16th Ward. Chasta, you are the Black voice, the Black man voice. Don't want to put any pressure on you. No. No, thank you. Thank you for being here. And I just want to share with the audience that one of the reasons that we connected is because I was at a gala and you came up to me, you told me you saw the story, and you said you cried. What was it when you heard the data, when you saw that? What was it that touched you? Why the reaction?
Well, first, that was shared in confidence. No. It was heartbreaking. One, I've got a 2.5-year-old daughter. I've got boys, and when you have a daughter, it just hits different. And I had, came home from work. I was in the basement, and I saw the piece, and I felt like, just as a male who is serious about providing and protecting what's mine, I felt like I and men in my network have failed, at keeping our women safe. That was, I think, the biggest takeaway from that. It was really a gut punch, and I was compelled. I mean, a lot of us talk about, how to secure the village and target the element and all of the things, but when you see the data, I had never seen it like that, and so it was shocking.
So let me ask you this. Do you know any black women who've been victims of crime?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I won't share the ones that are in my family, but, a close friend of mine was actually on 87th and Dan Ryan on her way to school. This happened when she was a teen. She was 14, and she was waiting on the bus stop, and the van pulled up at that gas station right there and snatched her and sexually assaulted her. This is just a little girl on her way to school, and just the thought of that, it's unsettling, but it pisses you off, at the end of the day. So yes.
So what can black women, black men do? What do you see the role and what can be done?
Well, I can't speak for all brothers, right? But I can tell you that it really starts in our homes. We've got to parent differently, and we've got to acknowledge that we live in a very violent society, and it is important to teach self-defense. It's also important to teach situational awareness. But I think the way that we parent our boys, we've got to make sure that they understand that under no circumstance can you put your hand on a woman. I think we've got to allow ourselves the freedom, because a lot of us are concerned about how much we make so that we can make sure that our families are not living in poverty. I mean, when I was in grad school, there was this piece of data that said that 50% of African American families spend 10 years or more of their lifetime living below the poverty line. And so if you think about all of the exposure that happens when you are living in poverty, that has a tremendous effect. So I think in the home, we just got to make sure that we're parenting our boys differently. That when we see that aggressive behavior against girls, play fighting is real popular. Some of the panelists talked about what they see in schools and where these interventions need to be. We got to check it there. When we're watching, if we're educators and we see these violent tendencies, we got to redirect it with each other on the street. I'm not asking for men who aren't competent with their hands to physically assault another male, but you do need to raise your voice and make sure that at least you're safeguarding the women that are potentially a threat, like the sister that you saw in that piece, with the Jeep.
One of the things one of the sisters said in the piece was, what can we do? Do we need to go to Springfield? Do we need to see some policies? So Karen, and to all of you, what can we do?
So first, thank you again for this, Dorothy. 20 years and here we are still. I don't think we have to change policies in Springfield. I think that there are already some policies in existence. It's illegal to assault someone. The law is there. I think that, one, the enforcement of the law, and it doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so I'm not just putting it on the police superintendent. I'm not just putting it on our state's attorney. It's not just, Superintendent Snelling or State's Attorney Fox or even Mayor Johnson or Alderwoman Coleman. It's really community having this one as an agenda item. It has to matter, right? It has to be at the top of our agenda. And then we have to think about, how do we interact with the people whose jobs it is to do this every day? Where does the faith community come in? Where do sororities and fraternities and other civic and social organizations come in? We can't spend all our time just partying, right? So what are those things that we can do in cooperation with the folks whose jobs it is to make this different?
All right, so let's talk about that. The role of the church, the role of fraternities and sororities, which are very important in our community. What can they do? What do you envision?
Well, I think that, one, awareness is extremely important. And so making sure that the D9 community gets together and raises this. That we have raised other things in our community, and we have done it successfully, but doing it collectively. It can't just be the Deltas, it can't just be the AKs, it can't just be the Sigmas or the Omegas. We have to do this collectively, and we have to do it consistently. So yes, it's going in the schools, but it's also talking among ourselves as adults.
Stephanie, for you. I know there are a number of city initiatives. Let's talk about that. And then how do you see African American women taking advantage of some of the resources that are available in the city?
Well, again, thank you for bringing this not only to the world, but to the City Council. It is myself, as well as the 7 African American women of City Council that have set forth a resolution calling for a special hearing addressing violence against Black women and missing Black women in the city of Chicago. So being intentional about this issue and bringing awareness. And I asked our chairman, I said, I don't want to be an agenda item. I want to be the agenda. To answer your question, partnerships, awareness with our Divine Nine, with our faith base, telling and sharing your soon-to-be award-winning investigative report to anyone and everyone who will listen and watch and see. Because as our brother here said, he was saddened of what he saw, but because you brought it to our attention, this is not normal. The Black woman is the most disrespected, unprotected, and neglected person, not only in Chicago, but in America. Calling for Chicago, we're very creative, and Superintendent Snelling was one of the first that I asked, how can we be creative with the 400 set-aside positions in the police department, that there are advocates and there is funding that will support those Black women that have been victims of crime. For every one white woman, 18 Black women are victims of crime. It's unacceptable, unacceptable.
Jasna, you and I spoke the other day, and you were telling me about an initiative, a program. Talk to me a little bit about that, and let's share that with the audience, because it was all about the dealing with the psyche.
Yeah. Thank you for that opportunity. There's a lot of investments in the community violence intervention community that are starting to show some positive gains, and one of them specifically is around cognitive behavioral intervention. You know, this was a treatment approach that started, 40 years ago, looking at reducing smoking and chemical dependency, but now you're seeing it used in the field of gun violence reduction, or community violence intervention. So there's research that actually shows that when you have a high exposure to crime and violence, the region of your brain that is responsible for emotional reasoning and decision making, it shrinks, right? And because of that damage, you become more impulsive. So sometimes you look at people and you're like, well, how could they just go from that to that, right? 0 to 100 is what we say, right? Well, it's because they have a damaged region of the brain. And what happens is it usually takes about, this is what the research says, it takes about 300 hours of cognitive behavioral intervention just to get it back to the normative state of development, right? So the challenge is, how do you target the individuals that are actually out here committing the crimes that we're up here talking about, and then entice them to get into a program that allows them to get that kind of dosage, right? And so that's what's being figured out in the community violence intervention community. And you're actually seeing that, the decision making, while they're not becoming nonviolent, right? I won't tell that story, but what's happening is they're choosing not to use guns. So imagine if we had that kind of strategic investment to reduce the victimization of Black women, right? And you're really getting at the perpetrators, and you're ensuring that they get that dosage. It'll have similar effects, right? This is a hypothesis, but the research is showing that that's the case.
Now, good point. Very, very, very good point. And I asked this question of the other panelists. but to you, because I think it's important we ask this again and again and again, because we have to teach our youth. So talk to me a moment about how do we reach the young people? You know, how do we make sure that they understand what is happening? And so those, you know, to your point about the various programs we see, how do we do that?
If I may, meeting our youth where they're at. In every CPS school, I can't even say starting in high school, we have to start in elementary school about teaching young black women to love themselves, that they are worthy of being loved, and not to let some knucklehead mistreat them. While it starts in the home, but certainly being intentional and making sure that our school district has the support to bring in organizations like you can, like North Lawndale, like Stephanie Love Patterson's domestic violence organization, like Women's Pastors United, where they can instill in the young women to first love themselves. We also have to address the opioid addiction, that our children are victims of party drugs. And as our brother said here, they are cognitively not thinking correctly. Our young women, black young women, are also being victims of sex trafficking. Their awareness, so in communities like mine in Inglewood and North Lawndale and on the west side, when we are walking to school and we see vacancies, vacant lots, abandoned buildings, that's something legislatively we need the support by way of Department of Buildings to address these inhabitable buildings in our community, so that a young woman can be aware of your surroundings. Don't walk alone. We need to instill in them these practices, but it starts by meeting our young people where they're at, and that is having the Chicago Public Schools being very intentional about providing these support services for them.
I think she's absolutely right when she says to meet them where they are, but they are not always in school. So community, you know, whether it is some type of community event, we all have block parties, we all have summer programs, we all have after school programs. And so the message has to be consistent. You know, in order for people to really have things at the top of their minds, they have to hear it over and over and over again. I think also advertisement, public service advertisement.
Dorothy, yeah, I want to just give credit where credit is due. You know, Dr. Vessel with I Am Able, she's in the audience, you know, has invested in making sure that behavioral health professionals are in the community, right? And part of the challenge is that we got to make sure that funding is stewarded to organizations like that to allow them to serve at scale. You know, we look at, you know, our president here from UCAN, right, Krista Hamilton, has a very large street outreach infrastructure built within her company. And these are folks who are members of the community, often young people who at one time committed harm to the community but are now employed. And we've got to allow them to build out that infrastructure.
So how do we get that information out to the community? I mean, you guys have talked about a lot of different organizations that exist. I know at the city there are resources there, but we need more funding. How do we make sure that the community knows about all these various things that are going on?
You talked about funding. Again, it's what you prioritize. Now, we just had a whole day of media about prioritizing sports. Now, don't get me wrong. I love the Bears. I love sports. I love the Bulls, the Sox, the Cubs. But have you heard about a $1 billion investment in keeping people safe? We have to talk about that with the same intensity, with the same intentionality, with the same fervor that we talk about our sports teams and our entertainment.
You heard it here.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to end on that note because I want people to remember $1 billion to this topic. There you go. All right. We've covered a lot, but as a community, we can only do so much. We need leaders to support the change that's necessary to stop this cycle of violence. After the break, we'll bring in Chicago Police Superintendent Larry Snelling and Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx to answer the tough questions. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm CBS 2 investigator Dorothy Tucker. Joining us now, Police Superintendent Larry Snelling and Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx. Thank you. But before we begin this discussion, I want to recognize Kim Foxx, not just for being here in her role as the county's top prosecutor, but she too is a survivor.
I think it might be easier for me to count the number of black women that I know who have not been a victim of crime or violence. My mother, my aunts, my friends, myself. I think it's a large sorority of us who have this shared history. And oftentimes we don't, just openly talk about it. There might be a moment where you share something and then someone says, "Oh, me too." But I grew up watching black women be victims of crime.
Thank you again for being here. Kim, I have to suspect that given your experiences, it has shaped how you do your job. What is the impact?
When I took this job, I took it having had those experiences of having survived violent crime and having known people in my life who have survived violent crime. And so when I took this role, was about centering people who have been harmed. And I am a black woman, first and foremost, and I've not shied away from what that experience has been. And what that looks like for the people that we served. And so it has been trying to lead an office that is focused on survivors and trauma informed in a way that recognizes the lived experiences of those who come in contact with our system, and appreciating that our voices, particularly the voices of black women, oftentimes is silenced. And not just, I think we talked about this, not just in the criminal justice space, across all sectors. It's why we have conversations about maternal mortality rates. We're dying giving birth. We are not evaluated with healthcare studies or mental health. Like, it's across the board. So it's not a surprise that it's in the criminal justice space, and I've tried to use my role and my platform to elevate what that means to be a black woman, not just a prosecutor, but also a survivor.
Superintendent Snelling, do you know any black women who've ever been victims of crime?
Oh, absolutely. 32 years on this job. I've seen
Beyond just the ones that you have just encountered who you didn't know.
Well, absolutely. And I'm starting off with the amount of years and the things that I've seen on this job to connect with some of the things that I saw growing up as a young man growing up in Inglewood. Just in my own household. I saw my mother at a very young age who was a victim of domestic violence at one point. Single mother, 4 brothers, 5 of us. So you can imagine what that led to in that household at some point eventually, right? Because one thing leads to the next. You want to protect your mother as a young son. But it wasn't just there. Saw it with other relatives, saw it with neighbors. This was something that I saw on a regular basis growing up, just in the streets, at a park. This was something that was, sad to say, commonplace. And it's still that way. Some of the issues that we have to look at, because we can look at it from a law enforcement perspective, and I do because that's what I do. Oftentimes, the question is, what are we doing when someone becomes a victim of domestic violence. We make an arrest, we take someone into custody, we get them charged, they go to court. The question now is, how seriously is this case taken in court? Number two, does the victim in this crime or the survivor of this crime feel comfortable enough to show up to court? Do they have enough confidence in the justice system to even report the crime? These are things that we have to work on, and these are things that we have to reach out to these victims to make them feel comfortable enough to know that we're going to stand with them, stand by them all the way through this.
Well, you heard our panelists say earlier, and quite frankly, I've heard it from black women as well. They don't feel as if their cases are treated the same. They feel sometimes when they report a crime that they are dismissed. They feel, Kim Fox said, when they file that police report and they get to the point that they want to go forward, they're told by prosecutors they aren't going to pursue the crime. So to both of you, what is your response to those kinds of complaints from women who say they get there and the police dismiss them?
So what I will tell you that we're doing right now, especially with our Bureau of Detectives and our officers, we're expanding our family liaison program. That program, our officers are trained in trauma response. When you're dealing with someone who has been victimized by domestic violence, we want our officers to approach that with an empathetic eye, right? They need to understand that this person is dealing with a level of trauma that they may not even understand at this point. You don't know how long they've been dealing with it, the effects that it has on them psychologically, and the effects that it has on an entire family. So at this point, we want our officers to make the people who have been victimized comfortable enough to come in and report. We have seen an increase in reporting of not only domestic violence, but sexual assaults. Now, some people may say that that's a bad thing, that you're seeing more reports of sexual assaults. I say no, because what we have now are people who are actually reporting these crimes. A lot of these crimes go unreported, and just because they're not reported does not mean that they're not happening. So at this point now, we can follow up and make sure that we're working to get some justice for these individuals. What we're also doing, especially for missing black women, cold cases, is that we just got a grant for our DNA analysis team with the Bureau of Detectives to follow up with DNA. We've also sent them off for training to learn how to use technology in a better manner, to follow up on these investigations, to build their investigatory skills, to try to reach some level of justice for these missing black women that people are oftentimes upset about. You know, they show up with pictures of missing individuals, and they just want some type of closure, and we're working toward that also.
I'm going to go ahead, Kim, I'll let you.
Yes, certainly. Listen, every decision that we make in the State's Attorney's Office has to be guided by the facts, the evidence, and the law. And sometimes the unfortunate reality of our job is that we may not have the evidence to pursue a case. And that is whether we're talking about, you know, a homicide case or a drug case. We have to have the facts, the evidence, and the law to support that. What we do, though, and particularly we start with a victim-centered approach, which is I don't presume that when you say something happened to you, that it didn't. I mean, I think one of the things that we hear from folks is that there's a presumption that somehow you are responsible for the harm that came to you. And our goal is to not do that. When we welcome folks to come, and we want them to come and file reports to proceed with cases where we have the evidence to do that, we also do recognize that the systems themselves can pose barriers. It's one of the reasons when we filed originally had the R. Kelly case that I came out and publicly said that I was a survivor, that I understood the barriers that people would have with coming forward, because I recognized that as a survivor, that coming and talking about, for example, sexual assault to a police officer, to a doctor, to a social worker, and then a prosecutor, And then having people judge, what were you wearing? Where were you? Why were you out that late? Or in instances like, you were abused by someone who was famous. Well, what were you doing there? Where were your parents? The cultural pieces that we have, the way that we engage, and how and Black folks aren't a monolith, but there are some cultural things, cultural norms that we have that if you don't have an environment that appreciates and recognizes that, we may slip through. And so trying to have cultural competency training within our office, trying to make sure that we are reaching people, as it was said earlier, where they are, to not bring our own inherent biases to this work. Because there's a lot of inherent bias that comes in this work. And that's the way that I think that we make it more open for survivors to come and report their stories, and for institutions to not reject those stories. And I'm not saying that our office is perfect. We've had a history of not taking those folks seriously because we have a disconnect from the community.
I want to go back to the perception, Superintendent. I mean, you both have talked about, what you're doing, but how do police officers perceive Black women as victims? How do they see us?
Well, the truth be told, that depends on the officer.
Well,
now, and I say that for this reason. Not everybody's built the same. Not everybody thinks the same. But the responsibility here for me, and I take on that responsibility, is to make sure that everybody responds the same. The key here is when we have someone who's victimized, you take that as seriously as anyone else who is victimized. When we have our people in our community, and yes, I say our community because I still live in the community and I'm not going anywhere and I'm not moving. The key here is the response in these communities, in our communities, have to be the same as any response in any other community. Any crime that has been committed against any person in our community has to be taken as seriously as any crime in any other community.
And why hasn't it been?
Well,
why, I hear what you're saying, what should be,
yes.
But what I'm asking you is, we're talking 20 years. This is not something that we saw last year or the year before. This perception, this treatment has been going on for years. And you're talking about having training, which is great, but you've probably had training before. Have you not?
No.
You've never done training of the Chicago Police?
No, let me explain to you. There's specific training. See, when we're talking about training, there's no overall fix for this when we talk about training.
You've never done unconscious bias training?
So let me explain this to you.
Okay.
I send somebody to training for 8 hours for unconscious bias. That does not get that person in the right mindset to do that. When we talk about unconscious bias, you can't just give them one class. This has to be infused in every aspect of their training. That's the part that has not happened. What I'm looking to do now is every aspect of police training is going to have some form of empathetic approach, an understanding of communities, an understanding of the human life as a whole. Because if we're not thinking about the sanctity of human life and infusing that in every aspect of our training, if we're not talking about the communities and our response to each and every community in every aspect of training, I give you an 8-hour course that you walk in and you hear a few words of it and you walk out there and you're never reminded of that again. You just go back to doing the same thing that you've been doing. Right now, with training, and I have a training background, and I can tell you that when you have training, that if there's a concept that you want the officers to not only understand, but you need them to apply it, it has to be in every aspect of every single thing that they do. So when I approach someone, and I approach a human being in any community, I should be approaching with respect. I should be approaching with empathy. And I should be approaching with a level of competence that when I go in with that empathy and respect, that I record, document enough information to now when it gets to the state's attorney, I have enough evidence for the state's attorney to charge these cases.
But let's talk about, let Kim talk about training as well, because you've mentioned to me that you've had the unconscious bias kind of training. And, you know, again, you can look at it and you can just kind of say, is it working?
You know, as you pointed out, Dorothy, this is not a new phenomenon. And I think this is, as I look and talk about my story, this is tracks for my lifetime. And I think having gotten into this role and being very deliberate about talking about the dynamics of race and the intersection of race in the criminal justice system is, I think, partly why I draw a lot of attention. Because historically, we haven't talked about these issues. We haven't talked about the disparities. We haven't talked about what it looks like, again, for black women in these, who have been victims of crime. And I, you know, not to make it about me, but as the first black woman who has held this seat, I think about the stuff that comes my way. The language that is used to describe me. The way that I am treated. And so it is not a surprise to me that if, as the top prosecutor who has earned her way to this job, that I am treated in such a way that the people whom I serve are treated equally or less than I am, then those conversations and about our systems that allow for this to happen, we've seen the backlash. And so I'm not saying that it has been sufficient. It has been new. And that newness in the innovation of saying we're having, as the superintendent said, not just an 8-hour training, but really over a course of days, that your evaluation as a prosecutor is not just how many trials have you done, but how much service have you given to the community? Are you engaging in the neighborhoods in which we serve? And if you are not, that is a part of the criteria in which we judge your proficiency as a public servant. And so we've tried to do that in a way that is responsive to our broader community. But I also will say, you know, the black woman wasn't going to fix this in 8 years. And I appreciate what black women leadership looks like, is that there's an expectation that we will take centuries-old problems and make them go away very quickly. And I am doing my best.
But, I hear both of you, but let me ask this. You know, you talk about what needs to be done, what you're doing. I appreciate that. But I'm wondering if a black woman has complained about feeling like her case was not treated the same way, feeling like police didn't handle her report the same way as they did someone else. Have you ever reprimanded a police officer, a prosecutor? Have they ever been disciplined, or is there this sense that they know which cases they can treat seriously and which ones they can ignore because they got a huge caseload? So do black women end up being kind of like at the bottom of the pile because, I'm not going to get in trouble for doing that one?
Well, I can start off. The answer to your question is yes.
So where do we complain?
And there are multiple places to complain, and I'll go into that. But what I will tell you is this. From the time that I was a supervising sergeant, there has to be a level of accountability that goes along with this. So when we talk about the past, I learned from the past. I don't live there, right? If I look and I know the history and I understand what that history is, I have to learn from that history. And then now, moving forward, I have to apply measures, accountability measures, so that we don't repeat that history. The issue here is understanding that history, believing that history, and looking at the numbers. I mean, when we look at 45% of black women are victimized, right? And we're just talking domestic violence. 51% of black women who are homicide victims, it has a domestic violence nexus to it. These are things that we have to take seriously. And if any time that I see that any of our officers have not taken this seriously, we will make sure that they're held accountable for doing that. I mean, we just recently, and I know I talk about this case a lot, it really bothers me that someone was released from prison and was able to go to a home of a woman who had had an order of protection for years, over a decade. And she was stabbed and her child was murdered as a result of it. We have to take these things seriously. I'll tell you this right now.
And I'm going to stop you though, because I know you've probably could talk forever.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Sorry, go ahead.
Because the audience I know has a lot of questions.
Oh, sorry.
Kim, I feel like I want you to wrap up and add what you want to add.
Yeah, I will just say quickly, there is training and there's culture. And it's the thing that culture has to change. You know, when I came into, I was a line assistant in this office for 12 years. I was a supervisor. I saw that we were doing trainings before I got there that showed black women who were victims of murder with their private parts splayed out that we were using in trainings as though that wasn't an actual woman. I have sat and listened to people, colleagues who eventually became employees, refer to black women as baby mamas or talk about those neighborhoods. Or we had a tradition in the office where pictures of like people who had been convicted, largely black people, were set on the wall and we celebrated. And then I come in and I say, this is not how we operate. But if the culture has been such that, again, we can put the mechanics in place to hold people accountable, and we're doing that. But I think we need a full-on culture change in law enforcement. That I think what you are seeing with Superintendent Snelling is talking about, having come from these environments and these lived experiences where it's not us versus them. I tell people all the time, I'm one of them. And how we treat them is a reflection of us.
And thank both of you for your commitment today to changing the culture. Thank you. As I said, we have a room full of voices here, and we want to hear what you have to say. Up next, we will invite all of our panelists back on stage to join in a larger discussion. We'll be right back. We have heard from community leaders and officials, and now we want to hear from you. We're opening up the discussion to our invited guests in the audience who have questions for our panelists. So raise your hand. Raise your hand. Okay. Thank you. And your name?
Reven Fellows. Question. With the National Black Agenda, National Black Club University, and we've been working on this issue when they first talked about women trafficking. We have a systematic program on trafficking and safe housing throughout the city in 300-something block club zip codes. We want to work with the alderwoman and the people that are involved in it, so we can be a part of Block by Block or activation. And we want to be boots on the ground. So we're doing it. We have brothers that are doing security and so forth. So the question is, can we partner with you guys with the National Block Club University, door by door, block by block?
Alderman.
Reven, absolutely, Mr. Fellows. I look forward to not only having you partner with us in Inglewood at Kennedy King College to spread the great news, but also with the Chicago Automatic Black Caucus. We are 20 members strong that represent the southwest and north side of Chicago.
Thank you. Thank you. Other question? Other question? Stand up, would you please? Your name, question?
My name's Deshaun Pope, and I wanted to ask, I've seen my mom, I'm gonna prep this question first. I've seen my mom go through it all. First starting when I was a young boy, my mom, she really wasn't home. She was she was a single mother, and I got 4 other siblings. And my whole life, for a minute, I thought she hated us because I've never seen it at home. But recently, it was like a year ago, I've seen my mom break down in tears. And when I turned 19, she talked to me and she told me and she opened up to me about some things she went through. But I don't know how to handle it. And I have a younger brother and he's been watching the same thing I've been seeing. And I want to teach him, but I don't know how. And I'm asking you right now, how can I help my family, myself, and my brother?
Gabby, Nicole, Chasna?
I would say counseling. I know that's the end all be all, but in order to be healed or start the healing process, you got to go through it. You got to process it. You got to see what that feels like. And places like Resilience offers counseling free for significant others, which would be you and your brother, and for the family. We can also treat everybody. So consider it.
Can I also respond to that real quick afterwards? I'd like to connect him with victim services, with the department, because I understand and I feel what you're saying right now. Having been through it, it sounds exactly like my story. So I would love to connect you with victim services.
And then, Dorothy, you have to talk about the mentoring that's available and being able to scale that. Many of our organizations do mentoring. We do it in schools, out of schools. But when I talk about what the Divine Nine can do, that's a prime example of providing that type of support and mentoring in the community.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, as Black women, we have historically have carried the history and the weight of our culture on our backs. And I'm hoping that Black women, as much as we embrace being queens and survivors, that we can also learn to be vulnerable and start to tell our stories.
Thank you. And thank you. Appreciate you. All right, we're going to do one more question.
First of all, my name is Josephine Wade, and the city called me Mother Wade, and this is to the superintendent in regard to training. You know, you have a lot of young policemen that have gone to service, and the sensitivity that they might have don't represent what they do when they at the police department. So how often, if a person have been in the war in Iraq or someplace like that, every 6 months, I think those men need to go for some type of training for trauma, and then they could be more sensitive.
Excellent question, Superintendent.
So what I would tell you is we've just opened up 2 new facilities for our officers to deal with clinicians, to talk about evaluations. We're also evaluating each officer as we go along, that if we recognize some type of trauma or some type of crisis with our officers, especially as to how they're responding to jobs, that we will refer them to those services. We also put them in our learning management system to document all of the training that we get for these officers, and then we reevaluate them as we go along. So it's an excellent point. It's one of the things that we want to make sure that we don't have our officers out there who are dealing with that level of trauma, because they could take that trauma to a job.
Thank you. We're going to probably run out of time before the rest of you can pipe in, but thank you all for that. We're going to be here, I'm sure, a few minutes afterwards, so please, everybody connect. I really appreciate your questions. Great questions. As I said, our time is up. Our time is up this morning. I want to thank everyone involved for their time, their honesty, their bravery, and their willingness to discuss such a sensitive and critical topic. We especially want to thank Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III and his staff here at Trinity United Church of Christ for opening up their church home. The most important thing we want to leave you with today is resources. We've assembled a wide range of materials on our website, CBS News Chicago. You can also rewatch this special on YouTube and our stream. This is just the beginning of our call to action. We will continue to report on this issue and be a champion for change. Thank you for your time, and thank you for joining us. Have a good day.